Alice's journey into the Looking-Glass lands. On a drowsy summer afternoon by the river, the grass felt like a warm velvet blanket. Alice sat resting against a tree, watching the dragonflies zip like tiny jewels. Suddenly, a flurry of movement caught her eye. A rabbit named Pippin, wearing a waistcoat and checking a massive pocket watch, scurried past. "Oh dear, I shall be too late," Pippin squeaked. Alice, fueled by a spark of wonder, scrambled to her feet and followed him right into a deep, dark burrow under the hedge. Down, down, down Alice tumbled. It was the slowest fall in the history of falling. She drifted past floating bookshelves, jars of orange marmalade that hovered in mid-air, and grandfather clocks that ticked backward. The walls of the tunnel were painted in swirling patterns of indigo and gold. "I wonder if I shall fall right through the earth," Alice mused, feeling quite like a feather caught in a gentle breeze. At the bottom, Alice found herself in a long hallway lined with locked doors. On a glass table sat a tiny golden key and a bottle labeled "Drink Me" in elegant loopy letters. One sip made her shrink until she was no bigger than a doll. Then, a nibble of a tiny cake labeled "Eat Me" stretched her out like a telescope until her head bumped the ceiling. "Curiouser and curiouser," Alice cried, her voice echoing in the vast, strange room. Wandering into a forest of towering blue mushrooms, Alice encountered a large, azure caterpillar named Zale. He sat atop a fungus, puffing lazily on a long, silver hookah. "Who are you?" Zale asked in a sleepy, rhythmic voice. Alice struggled to explain, as she had changed sizes so many times that morning. Zale blew a perfect smoke ring that turned into a butterfly and fluttered away, leaving Alice with the cryptic advice that one side of the mushroom would make her taller and the other shorter. Further along the path, Alice looked up to see a wide, toothy grin hanging in the air. Gradually, the rest of a striped cat named Felix materialized on a tree branch. Felix had the peculiar habit of vanishing, starting with his tail and ending with his smile. "Most everyone here is mad," Felix purred, his eyes glowing like lanterns. He pointed a translucent paw toward the woods, directing Alice toward a house where the chimneys were shaped like rabbit ears. Under a giant cedar tree, a long table was set for tea. Thistle, the March hare, was sitting at the corner, his ears adorned with bits of straw. "No room, no room," Thistle shouted as Alice approached, even though the table was mostly empty. Alice sat down anyway. Indignant, Thistle began to butter his watch, complaining that it was 2 days slow even though he used the very best butter. Across from Thistle sat a man in a towering top hat named Teasdale. He was perpetually stuck at 6 o'clock tea time. "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" Teasdale asked, leaning over the teapot. Alice tried her best to solve the riddle, but Teasdale only sang nonsense songs and tried to stuff a sleepy dormouse into a sugar bowl. It was the most confusing party Alice had ever attended, and she decided it was high time to leave the madness behind. Alice finally reached a magnificent garden where the roses were being painted red. A loud trumpet blast announced the arrival of Cardia, the Queen of Hearts. Cardia was a formidable woman who marched with a deck of playing card soldiers. "Off with their heads," she bellowed at the slightest provocation. She invited Alice to a game of croquet, but the mallets were live flamingos and the balls were grumpy hedgehogs that kept crawling away. The afternoon took a turn for the serious when Alice was summoned to a great courtroom. Jax, the Knave of Hearts, stood in chains, accused of stealing the Queen's tarts. The jury was made of small birds and animals, scribbling furiously on slates. Alice felt a strange tingling sensation. She was growing. As Jax pleaded his innocence, Alice rose higher and higher, her head reaching the rafters of the court. "You're nothing but a pack of cards," Alice shouted, no longer afraid of the Queen's temper. At her words, the entire court rose into the air, spinning like a whirlwind of paper. Suddenly, the courtroom faded, and the wind turned into the rustle of leaves. Alice opened her eyes to find herself back on the riverbank, the sun setting behind the trees. It had all been a dream, but as she walked home, she could have sworn she heard a faint, lingering purr in the breeze.